All right. We are just going to give it a second. All right. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Riley, and I am the events manager at Next Chapter Booksellers. So thank you all for joining us today. Next Chapter Booksellers is a small independent bookstore located in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm curious on where you guys are tuning in from. So if you guys can go into the chat portion, use that and tell us where you guys are tuning in to our event here today. So there we go. So just a little bit of information. So use that chat portion that I just directed you to for making comments and chatting with either me or our panelists through there. Towards the end of the evening, there will be a Q&A section. If you guys look at your toolbar, there is a Q&A button there. Please put all of your questions for the Q&A into that. That way we can make sure that they're all getting answered and not getting lost in the chat with other talking points. So we will do our best to read all of that and get through all of our questions. So you also will be directed automatically to the Next Chapter Booksellers website at the end of the event, so you can purchase a copy of today's book. So without further ado, let me introduce the authors of the evening. So first we have Joseph, I forgot to check how to pronounce your last name. Joseph,
it's like Tchaikovsky, only Tachovsky.
Tachovsky is a graduate of the University of Minnesota and the son of Frank Tachovsky, commanding officer of the 40 Thieves on Saipan, also known as Tachovsky's Terrors. Cynthia Kroc holds a BA in journalism and history from Marquette University, a master's degree from the University of Minnesota, and an MFA from the University of Southern Maine. She is an author of 5 novels, including the award-winning The High Cost of Flowers. So thank you very much for joining us today, and you guys can take it from here.
Great.
All right. So I'm going to begin with what was the impetus to begin to write this book. And it all began at my father's funeral with a eulogy that was delivered there. Because Dad never talked about the war. It was pretty obvious he was a colonel in the Marine Corps, but it was World War II was something he never talked about. And during his funeral, this gentleman got up to speak about Dad and his tenure as mayor, but then he sort of made a left turn and talked about the first time that he met Frank Tachovsky was at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And this young fellow was there as an ROTC candidate, naval ROTC, and Dad was there on the GI Bill, and he kind of stood out because he was old. And in the naval ROTC meetings, there would always be this Marine sergeant who was very surly and never cracked a smile, and if he had occasion to say your name, he'd just bark it out. But one day he saw this surly sergeant talking to Frank, and he was uncharacteristically happy, and they were laughing and joking together. And the young fellow thought it was odd until he saw it happen a couple more times. And then he went up to the sergeant and said, "Excuse me, but how do you know Frank Tachovsky?" And the sergeant snapped back, "That's Lieutenant Tachovsky to you. And when you speak of him, you do it with respect. He was our platoon leader on Saipan when a Japanese tank broke through our lines. And we had no weapons to fight it. We all thought we were goners because the tank kept advancing and laying down this withering machine gun fire, and we all thought we were just gone. And then all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye runs this solitary figure into the withering fire, shoots a bazooka, disables the tank, and kills the crew inside." That was the lieutenant. He saved my life that day. He saved the lives of everybody in the platoon. So when you speak of him, you do it with respect. needless to say, if you would have heard a pin drop on the carpet if one had fallen. That bit of eulogy prompted me to go online and search our name and Saipan. And then up popped this Leatherneck website with this article entitled Tachovsky's Terrors. And it talks about the Scout Sniper Platoon on Saipan. And beneath it was a little bit of text that someone wrote, submitted by Chris Tipton. And it said, "This was my father's platoon during World War II, and everything in it was true, except they weren't known as terrors. They were known as the 40 Thieves." So at that point, my interest was quite piqued, and I went into the garage and opened up Dad's footlocker that had sort of been just in a corner, not touched for 40 years. He didn't want to talk about the war. I wasn't going to touch it while he was alive, but now it seemed kind of fair game, and I opened it up, and it was just a treasure trove of his memories as a young lieutenant in the Marine Corps. There were timetables of the super chief from Chicago to Los Angeles, awards of valor, and then his platoon rosters for Guadalcanal, Saipan, as well as Tarawa. So I looked at the one from Saipan for the Scout and Sniper Platoon and started checking out the names on the roster. And here in the center, you see the name Bill Knuppel, or William F. Knuppel. And this was really curious because Dad had a buddy that we would always see every winter when Dad would winter in Arizona, and his name was Knuppel. And it's funny, you could always identify Dad's Marine buddies because they only went by a last name or a nickname. They were Knuppel, they were Doc, they were Goodman. They never seemed to have first names. And this is what the lieutenant, and it turns out that Bill Knuppel was his sergeant on Saipan. And it never struck me as strange at the time, but now that I look back on it, whenever Bill started to want to bring up topics of World War II, like Saipan or Tinian or Don Evans or Martin Dyer, all Dad had to say was, "Bill, those days are over," and Bill would tacitly comply. And even at as 80-year-old men, they still had this sort of unspoken relationship of sergeant to lieutenant. And I just thought that was interesting. But after Dad passed away, and knowing Bill Knuppel as well as I did, I decided to go and visit Bill. And I took the roster and whatever photos that I had with me that I found in the footlocker. And as opposed to Dad, who never wanted to talk about the war, Bill was just a walking, talking encyclopedia. And he told stories about the push into the valley, the pig roast, one Martin Dyer, Daniel Kenny, and one fellow that he spoke of in particular was Donald Evans. He was a corporal, he was a squad leader, and Don Evans was a good buddy of Bill Knuppel's. In fact, they had a little leave in Kona together. And Don was the star of every Southeast Nights team in Kansas City. He was the big man on campus. He was the heartthrob of all of the girls. And in a male beauty contest, he was elected Mr. Kansas City, not once, but twice. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia now so she can talk a little bit about Don Evans and he had this curious relationship with his mother.
So as a mother myself, of now an adult male, I've found Joe kind of knows the guys as like almost second fathers. He's been part of their lives for a long time. And I just got to know them as young guys. And so I know them as like 19-year-olds. Don had this way. His mother still wanted to think of him as her young son. And he didn't hold back too much when he would write letters to her. And we have some of those letters. So it was just real interesting. And so I thought I would just give you a little flavor for Mr. Don. He also had a ton of girls writing to him, which he found kind of annoying because they all expected him to write back as well. But here's one of his letters. This is from January of 1944. At this time, the guys were just settling into new digs in Hawaii because they were going through training. So there wasn't anything exciting. They're not in battle at this point. He's got time to write. Okay, dear Mom, you know what I was looking for when I joined the Marine Corps? Well, we've had solid years of it, and I'm enjoying every one of them. This war came at the most opportune time, and now I've found my calling. The Corps offers everything I've been looking for, and I've become a first-class fighting man. I've lost a lot of buddies along the way, but Hal Moore, Emmerich, and me came through the assault on Tarawa unscathed. The Japs said it would take 1,000,000 men 100 years to grab that island, but we Marines did it in 3 bloody days. Thank Dottie for her nice letter, but aren't there any men back home at all? I got too many women on the string to do that much wishful thinking. I've got to sign up for 4 more years overseas just to escape them all. So please, don't tell any more gals to write to me, because I won't be able to answer them. I'm writing to Jean, Dottie, Judy, Kathleen, and Jeanette back home, one in La Jolla, to whom I'm betrothed, and a fiance in New Zealand, a Maori girl. Woo, but oh my. Here's a commentary on that lecture you gave me. I'm sure burned up over it, can't figure it out at all. If you think I'm the sweet, clean, sensitive, sheltered Sunday school lad that you think I am, why, somebody is awful deluded. I've been living, you know, and I've matured a little along the way. I've had about 10 years of experience crammed into these last few. This war ain't being fought in church, not in this part of the world anyhow. The jungle fighting don't follow the rules, and a pistol provides more comfort to me than a Bible. Your continual worrying and praying has got to come to an end. And if you're going to do a lot of wishful thinking, count me out. Emmerich says, what my people don't know won't worry them, so I don't tell them. I think he's got the right idea. So much for that. Well, so this letter don't appear too austere. I'll add a belated Happy New Year. Love, Don. And in some ways, I mean, I don't think all the guys were probably that blunt with their moms, but you know, unlike today when folks are in the armed services and they can email and text and have phone calls back home, these guys wrote letters, and sometimes the letters didn't get back and forth for a couple of months, and so they did change, and while home didn't change so much, they did. So I was going to write, this is the saddest part. I'm going to kind of skip ahead here, Joe. One of the saddest parts of their relationship is that his mom keeps trying to reach out. And I'm just going to, I guess I'll do 2 more. This is one written 2 months later. So March 1944. By this time, Don has been accepted and is training as one of the scout sniper platoon. They weren't called 40 Thieves yet. And so she writes him a letter. They're sitting around the campfire at night as they're reading this, drinking a little bit and reading letters from home. Here's one. My dearest son, I've sure neglected you this last week. Seems like I am swamped in work, which really isn't as necessary as writing you. This big bond drive is on, and I'm working on it. Gracie Allen, George Burns, and Dinah Shore put on a big stage show here in the auditorium last night. The radio news this morning said the war in Europe will be over this year, but the struggle in the Pacific will be a long one. I can't bear to think of it. You left 2 years ago tomorrow, and it's been a very long 2 years for us here at home. Don't you ever get into the city where you can get a real photograph taken, one without whiskers and a freak haircut? Honey, you're going to ruin your beautiful hair by haggling it up in such an old, awful fashion all the time. You may lose that pretty wave. Are you keeping well? Have you seen Tommy and Norman yet? Do you have any more attacks of that fever? I do pray. Just love it. You know, the mom and her just couldn't like walk away from asking him about his wavy hair. One of the last letters that we have in the book is Don did not make it through the war, and one of his high school buddies, Dooley, who was also on the football team, writes a letter home to the Evans family to tell them about Donnie's last hours, and that letter has not arrived yet. And she writes a letter to Donnie, not knowing that he's already passed. Dear Donnie, Jean told me she had sent you a big picture of herself, tinted and all, and you didn't even acknowledge it. Why? Elaine says she writes you regularly. How are you and Dottie getting along? Your daddy's the superintendent at the downtown Wolfermans, but he isn't very enthusiastic about the job because he wrangles all day with his supervisor. Otherwise, we are all well. Mrs. Flynn took her boy and your brother on a fishing trip in the Ozarks. They left Sunday, probably be back tomorrow. We don't know what the year will bring for your baby brother, of course. He'll be 18 in September, and we'll have to register. Southeast is trying to negotiate a deferment so he can graduate. Please write soon. Tell us all about you, Tommy, Norman, and all your buddies. We miss you so much. Love, Mother. I always like to, Joe, tell them a little bit about mail.
Well, mail was something that the Marines dispersed intermittently because they could control it, because the last thing they wanted was a distracted Marine. They didn't want them getting a Dear John letter. And if they were going into combat, the last letter they might write would be a week prior to the ship leaving Hawaii, and then they might not get any mail until the battle had ended, or even have an opportunity to post a letter until the battle had ended. So it could be, 3 weeks in between getting letters and receiving letters. I just wanted to share with you when he talks about his haircut. Yeah, this is, he drew this little picture of himself and sent it off to his mom. So this is what she's commenting on about haggling his hair up in such an awful fashion. He was quite a character. He had this habit of referring to anyone who outranked him as boss, which a lot of people who outranked him didn't like. But to those who knew Don, found it a charming little quirk of his. But so besides Knuppel, finding him, I went through the roster and I was able to locate 4 more men who were still alive. One, unfortunately, was suffering from dementia. And I didn't want to, what memories he had, I didn't want them to be the wretched memories that the rest of the memories, the rest of the men still carried with them the scars of the battle. But the 3 men I found were Bob Smots in Georgia, Roscoe Mullins in West Virginia, and Marvin Strombo in Montana. So armed with the intimate knowledge of the platoon that Knuppel gave me, I started visiting these fellows. And I think because I knew so much about the platoon that only guys in the platoon would know, they really took a fancy to me and started to open up old wounds and really tell me things about their experiences during war. They even shared the nightmares that they had and still have, and they're recurring. In fact, Bob Smott's wife in Georgia took me aside early on and said how great it was that I was talking to Bob because he'd never done that before in his life. And then she confided to me that as a young bride, she would wake up at night to find Bob choking her. because he was having his nightmare where he was chasing the Japanese through the elephant grass on Saipan because he watched them kill his best buddy, Daniel Kenny. So all of these gentlemen, I went around in a little circle route, and I would get information from them, and maybe somebody told me something new that I would bring up to somebody else, and then they could remember a little bit more, and it just got to be this sort of wonderful duty of a circle route around the United States, and I always report back to Knuppel. And at one point, Knuppel said that someone a buddy of his in the 6th Regiment had written a book about his experiences in the Marines. And I thought, yeah, sure. And it turned out to be Leon Uris. And his first book was Battle Cry. And it was a fictionalized account of his experiences as a Marine on Tarawa. And he and Knuppel were in the same outfit on Tarawa. And in his fictionalized account, he has this group of notorious thieves within the 6th Marine Regiment. He nicknamed them the Foxes. And in it, there's this episode where they steal an Army colonel's Jeep. So I get a little geezed up about this and decide to ask all of these guys if they ever stole an Army colonel's Jeep. And each one of them just kind of said, no. And the other one said, no. And then I went to Bob Smots, the last one, and I asked him the same question, and he said, no. And at that point, I was just crestfallen until he continued. It was an Army captain's Jeep, and we beat the hell out of that thing. So these guys had a lot of stories over the years about, I think it was maybe at this point, 8 years of material that I had amassed and assembled as an oral history. And at that point, after submitting to some publishers who showed initial interest, they said, oral histories don't sell, write it as a narrative. And I was kind of flummoxed. And that's where Cynthia came in.
It was. You know, I have, so I have training as both a journalist and I had a history major, and then at some point became a fiction writer. And when seeing all the materials and the interviews and the research and a lot of the pictures that Joe had, it was like Christmas time, because we could truly put together a beautiful, true, lively story. And it isn't just, it's a memoir more of the men, because we really didn't put anything in it that wasn't their own words. And sometimes we use their words as the description. So it was an amazing project. Amazing. Should we ask if people, if you want to ask any questions, you can press your Q&A button and type one in. We love to respond to questions. Right, Joe?
We do. And while they ponder their questions, I just want to sort of reiterate what Cynthia said about the wonderful job that she had of helping to put flesh on the bones of their story and to breathe life back into these young men. And it's funny, even though I knew these guys as little old men, in my mind's eye, they were always going to be these rough and tumble 19, 20-year-olds. And we sent off the manuscript to the publisher. And then because we were fortunate enough to get an agent and a publisher, and the minute we did that, I get this email from a fellow named John Zuziak. And I'll just go back to the roster here, because the last name on it is John J. Zuziak. So Richard Zuziak asked me if I'd like his father's war photos. And I said, sure, thinking they were just USMC issued. But because it was illegal for anyone to carry a camera on them because you might be thought of as a spy at that point. But he had a camera, and there's a little episode. Well, I have to talk about one character first, who is always referred to by Bob Smots as a nuisance, kind of this kid from Detroit that named Warren H. Tipton, and they gave him some type of nickname, and it began with an H, could have been Herman, he couldn't quite remember. And because of that, we just thought that he was just some scrawny little kid from Detroit that was a nuisance.
He was 17 years old.
Yeah, 17 years old. He was going to turn 18 on the day they landed on Saipan.
Yep.
And Warren H. Tipton's middle name was Hobart. So that became his nickname. They all called him Hobart, probably in a derisive fashion, but he liked it. And Smots, Don Evans wrote home about this cute little 17-year-old PFC that we have, who's just, having the time of his life and wouldn't be anywhere else. And this is Hobart. So we had initially described this kid as a scrawny kid, that we get this big corn-fed lummox of a fellow, and we had to immediately go in and rewrite those introductory chapters and change the nickname that we had given him to the reality of it, of Hobart. The other thing that was a big boon that we had found that was in the Zuziak photos is Bob Smots always talked about this mission into Pololu, a training mission on Hawaii, where they were supposed to go up into the hills and live off the land, but they stumbled upon this off-limits village of Pololu, and the FBI had declared it off-limits because the whole village was filled with Japanese sympathizers and spies, so much so that all of the men had been sent to internment camps. And all that lived there were women and children. And the woman who ran the general store there was the head spy, and she'd send messages to Japanese submarines offshore with this radio that the FBI couldn't find, and they'd set up a triangulation station to find it, and they just couldn't. They were flummoxed. So they wandered into this town of Pololu, and the old woman spy hooked them up with some young girls to get them fraternizing so they could get some information out of the Marines. And they're there for a couple of days having the time of their lives. But finally they get busted because the head of the Hawaiian Home Guard hears about it and invites them to his house for a cup of coffee, and then they get sent back to camp to, get into trouble for their, unauthorized holiday. So this is all a Bob Smots story. But evidently, John Zuziak was there as well. And here is a photo of some of the 40 Thieves with women and children, the only people who are living there. This guy is the Wild Bill Emmerich that is mentioned in his Evans letters. So this was just a wonderful find to verify that Smots wasn't just making things up or misremembering. There's even a photo of the girls of Pololu. And initially, we were kind of treating them as geishas, so we had to go in and do a little rewrite on it, because these are just such pretty young girls. And they were just, the guys were having the time of their lives, and they were enjoying it too, because there were no men their own age around. They would have mock military weddings that they would have, and they were just having a great time of it. In fact, when they left, they even received photographs of the girls to keep as a memory. And this one says, "To Zuziak," and I think it's from Myrtle. So these are just a wonderful trove of things to help verify what Bob Smots had said. And here's even a picture of them having lunch at the Hawaiian Home Guard's house. This guy is Venancio Valenciano. He's the one who is suffering from dementia. This is Bob Smots. That's Wild Bill Emmerich. He was a club fighter out of Chicago. That's Don Evans. This is Jesus Orozco, who was nicknamed the Ipana Kid because his teeth were so brightly white, and Ipana was a toothpaste of a day. And this fellow that you can barely see, his name was Charles Fields. So that prompted rewrites of the book. And information as more people and families of the thieves find out about the book and read the book, they provide information that not necessarily different, but to verify, like Lonnie Jackson was the shortest guy in the platoon, but that doesn't mean anything until you find out that he was 5'3" tall. Don Evans was 6'3" tall. And in fact, Lonnie was an inch too short when he first went in to become a Marine, and he was denied. So he spent a week stretching himself by tying cinder blocks to his feet and hanging from a tree. And then when he went in, he had noticed that they had people take their shoes off when measuring their height. So he put layers of cardboard in his socks, and he was just 5'4" the second time around. And he was enlisted in the Marine Corps. And he was a tough little bugger by all accounts.
So Joe, one point I think I came away with from the letters and from reading Joe's some of Joe's interview material is, and I remember my dad saying this as well, that this was an opportunity to see the world, that guys came out of little towns and wherever it may have been. And like my dad joined the Navy because he didn't want to have to be a soldier and only cover the same 10 feet, 10 miles for 3 years. And some of the enthusiasm that, like, Evan's comments are not unique. There was a genuine 18, 19-year-old excitement about what was going to happen and what they were doing. And that kind of surprised me. It did surprise me.
Well, in that vein, Bob Smots said that the Marine Corps was only interested in people 18 years old, 19 years old, because they just didn't have any sense. And they were a crazy bunch, and they'd do anything they were told. But to Cynthia's point about excited about traveling and seeing the world, we have been spoiled as time has marched on from those days where for people to pick up and take a trip to Thailand is not uncommon. But back in the 1940s, before World War I, it was very uncommon to travel even as far as 10 miles away from your home or 20 miles away from home. And that might only be because you lived on a farm and that was where the nearest town was. These people young men were getting out in the world and seeing places that they had only read about before in picture books.
Yeah.
So do we have any questions yet?
I don't see any going up there. Oh, some of those names I saw come up, I know you have questions. You're not shy types, like Paul and Marie and Pam.
Well, evidently they are tonight.
So our writing process was interesting. We got along really well. And I had a lot of respect for Joe's work, and it was a joy to bring these guys back to life. We would sometimes exchange emails, right, with new chapters and stuff. But we had the unusual situation of both of us kind of living between the Twin Cities and a part of Wisconsin. So we spent a lot of time together writing and working. And the last 4 months, reading it out loud to each other to just get the right words and punctuations and whatever.
The hardest part was always trying to find where to start the book. And a lot of early mentors, found that, sort of the chapter Red Sky and Morning, that's when it would start to pick up and sort of become interesting. And those chapters had a purpose. They had, as you know, it was the chapters were already there and already designated. We just had to convert that and from the oral history into the narrative and make their words and memories either dialogue or text.
Mhm. So we just had a question from someone about how long it took us to write the book. And, you know, Joe worked on it 5 years before I think I got involved. The first time I read parts of the book was 2016. And that was when you were more building it on your own, and just the first time we met. Then we started working together more in 2017. So it was a good long process. There is a question. In researching the book, did you read many other books about the war in the Pacific? If so, which ones?
Definitely. And just other books in general. For Whom the Bell Tolls, Gone with the Wind, with the Old Breed.
Yeah.
There was another, Battle Cry by Leon Uris. I made a trip to the National Archives in Maryland and found Colonel Risley. He was the commander of the 6th Marine Regiment, and the 40 Thieves reported directly to him. And that was very odd to have a platoon report directly to the regimental commander. And it was his daily journal. So he's writing about what they're doing all the time. And they're mentioned quite often in his report. And that was very helpful to help place dates, because these old guys didn't necessarily say on June 22nd, XYZ happened. You only knew what days men died. But as far as other actions that took place, that really helped us to kind of locate the plausible place where the story might be.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very helpful. God, I'm looking over at my library over here to see if another, I read Robert Sherrod's Tarawa book too, because all of the men were on Tarawa, and to get a flavor of what they had experienced before they went into Saipan.
Yeah, that had been one of the bloodiest battles until Saipan,
Yes.
and terrible. I mean, it was terrible. And for me, I read more history because, like I think a lot of Americans, were familiar with the war in Europe, but the Pacific is not that widely studied. And also one of those kind of little unusual things that happened was I discovered that I knew my dad had been in the Pacific, and he was in the Navy, and the ship that he was on, he wasn't at Saipan, he joined it immediately after the battle at Saipan. So, you know, just these, but so I spent more time trying to understand and who the characters were, who the main decision makers were, and have that sense of history. So we have another one.
Yep. Actually, well.
Oh, should I read out loud in case they don't see it? I don't know.
Sure. I'm sorry.
Do you know if the few survivors remaining have been able to read the book? If so, has it generated any new memories from them?
Well, all of the fellows read the first oral history of it. They all started with that. And I gave that to them to see if that piqued any memories or brought some more things out. And one of the things that came out of it is one fellow in the platoon named Otto Hebel did a great impersonation of Adolf Hitler. But as far as seeing it actually in print goes, the 3 remaining thieves, Bob Smots, Roscoe Mullins, and Marvin Strombo, all knew that it was we found a publisher and it was going to be printed. And unfortunately, Bob Smots passed away in the year that that bit of good news came our way. That was June of 2018. And then when the book came out in the beginning of June 2019,
2020.
Marvin, party?
2020.
Oh, okay, then Smots died in 2019.
Yeah.
In 2020, Marvin Strombo and Roscoe Mullins were alive to read it. And I should have brought it up, but there's Marvin autographed a copy for Roscoe that was really sweet. To my fellow thief, love Marvin. And they were able to read it, but unfortunately Marvin passed away at the end of June of this year.
Yeah. And one of the really other kind of touching points about the two of them is that they were best buddies in the platoon, and they're the last two to survive. So that I think that's kind of a touching piece. So
and Roscoe is still alive today.
Yeah. What movies did you watch about the war or battles in the Pacific?
Well, Knuppel gave me a lot of DVDs that he had and VHS tapes, and I was able to find a VHS tape, and that was sort of the Marine Corps monologue with film footage. So it got to be kind of one thing that I found very beneficial in my writing. Cynthia didn't need to do this, is that I would listen to a lot of old time radio. Like, how do you describe events in words? And I found that very similar because people, the speaking word or a written word does the same thing. And so when they talk about a bomb going off or a mortar strike hitting, I would look at the image on the TV and I would see that, and I'd quick jot down what I saw. I watched Battle Cry, which was a good attempt at it, but it played more up their experiences outside of war, like on New Zealand and on Hawaii. I also watched the Pacific.
We both.
Epic, and that might be about it.
Yeah, one of the pieces.
The Last Samurai.
Oh, okay.
But I saw that kind of after the fact.
Yeah.
Of it going in, but someone sent me that. They thought I might be interested in it, and then I sent it to Marvin and to Roscoe to see if they thought it was realistic, and they concurred that it was, the bonsai aspect of it.
We found ourselves having to do, get distracted at times by having to do pretty serious research about like what was the vegetation on the island, or more than one airstrip, where what else can we find out about the second airstrip? Or I keep bringing this one up, how long does it take a body to bloat that's in heat in the water? Some pieces about the rifles used. There were these small points that, because the guys didn't always remember, or they wouldn't know that. So to be accurate, because Hollywood's not always accurate, we spent a fair amount of time dogging that stuff down.
So someone asked a question on the chat line, which was, "Hi Cindy, how long did you work with Joe to take 600 pages of oral histories into a 300-page book?" I guess that was how long. Well, I guess we never answered the question of how long it took to write it. And I think, well, we started in around the fall of 2017, and our goal was to get it out by for the 75th anniversary of the invasion of Saipan. And we actually finished it in time, but then finding an agent and getting it published took a little bit longer. We found the agent and publisher in June of 2018. So I think the conversion of it from an oral history into the narrative took maybe 6-7 months, do you think, Cindy?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But then production time, just, you're dealing with story editors and copy editors and all that kind of stuff, that it just has its own rhythm that you walk along in, right, Joe?
Yeah, and they did a very nice job and a very faithful job to our vision of the book.
They did. They very much did. Okay, any others? The rest seems quiet.
Crickets.
It is a Friday night. We should all be.
We're
We're both drinking water. We're not knowing what you all are doing, but
Yeah, there's got to be a fish fry somewhere still on.
in Wisconsin. This has been a pretty tumultuous day, though, for all of us, I think, when you see the President of the United States flown off to Walter Reed Hospital.
All right, we got another question here about what was favorite or most surprising part of the research. I would say the most surprising part was how, for having spent their whole lives trying to forget and not talk about the war at all, at how much my old leathernecks embraced the idea and looked forward to the book and their story being told.
Yeah.
Roscoe Mullins is so proud of it, as our family members too, because this is something that was never discussed at home. Jesus Orozco's family contacted me after I sent them a letter thinking that he was still alive, and he never talked about the war at all. And they had photos of him and all of these guys, and I'm able to tell them who those guys were. I'm able to tell them when he got injured, how he got injured, and give them a flavor of what he went through. Same thing with Lonnie Jackson's sons, are so pleased with the book and how happy their dads would be at that their story's been told.
One of the most interesting parts of the research that I don't know that I still know all the facts, but when before they all shipped out to Saipan, there were some war games that would be taking place on Hawaii, and when the 40 Thieves arrived, there was mass chaos. There were ships being there was fire on some of the ships. There were guys jumping off of ships there as explosions happened. And if you try to really research what happened, it's kind of it's a very much still behind the curtain kind of event in the war. And the thought is that as they were loading ammunition onto some of the ships, there was a crash with fuel, and it set up. There were, after Pearl Harbor, this was not what the Navy wanted people to see, but there were a number of Navy sailors and Marines killed in that, and so they had to delay the war game part. And I was just fascinated. You wonder what other kind of stories of that sort might be deep in the history books.
Well, Dad spoke of that event, and on a cassette tape that my brother had made of Dad looking through photographs, and he said things like that happened all the time in the Pacific. Somebody screws up and blam.
Yeah.
It was part of it. We just had another question come in of how many of the 40 Thieves made it out of Saipan. Well, 5 of them were killed on Saipan. Daniel Kenny, Thomas Arello, Martin Dyer, Don Evans, and Philip Johnson. Wild Bill Emmerich was severely wounded, and 4 other fellows were wounded and didn't come back to the platoon. So out of the 40 who landed on the beaches, 30 were still functioning and in the platoon at the end of the battle for Saipan.
And they were immediately shipped off. Well, not quite immediately, but they went off to do other battle.
Well, to get, they only had a few weeks to rest and recuperate before they got shipped off to Tinian, which was the adjacent island to Saipan. And the main reason of this bold strike of invading Saipan and Tinian and the Marianas, because it was thousands of miles ahead of Allied lines and Japanese territory, and it was quite a risky move. But the islands possessed two assets of great interest to the Allies, and those were the airfields on the islands, the Slido airfield on Saipan and the Ushi Airdrome on Tinian. And it was from the Ushi Airdrome that the Enola Gay took off from in August of 1945. Well, I think we're getting on to a witching hour.
We-
So if there aren't any more questions, I'd like to thank Riley and Next Chapter for
Yeah.
hosting this event. It's been a lot of fun tonight, and thank everyone for attending.
Well, that's a lot more about World War II than I ever learned in AP US history. So
Oh,
it's really fun being able to like sit back and moderate and listen to all of these and just like learn so much that I probably wouldn't have seeked out otherwise. So yeah. Everybody make sure that you buy a copy of the book. You will be automatically redirected to the website after I close out, as well as I put a link in the chat. So if you guys can click that and purchase copies of books, that's a great way we can support our writers and independent bookstores these days. It makes a great Christmas gift for like dads. Maybe that should be on your list. So just putting that small plug in there. Cynthia and Joseph, thank you so much for coordinating to do this event with us. It's always super great to have authors that are like, hey, we're from the area and we'd love to be involved with Next Chapter. And it's a bummer we can't have you guys in the store as usual, but
Well, another
second
year.
best.
Thank you so
And-
much.
yes, thank you so much. Really loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.